The road stretched endlessly through the frozen countryside, lined with barren trees covered in frost. The air was biting cold, and the occasional gust of wind sent small flurries of snow swirling across the cracked asphalt. Daniel Hayes, a 40-year-old rancher and horse trainer, gripped the steering wheel of his old pickup truck, his eyes focused on the road ahead. The heater in his truck hummed weakly, barely keeping the cold at bay. He wasn't supposed to be on this road. His usual route home was blocked by fallen branches from last night's storm, forcing him to take this remote, rarely traveled stretch of highway. And that was when he saw it. At first, it was just a shadow among the trees. Then he saw the movement, a horse. Daniel's brows furrowed as he instinctively eased his foot off the gas, his eyes locking onto the shivering figure barely visible through the trees. Something wasn't right. He pulled over, his tires crunching against the frozen ground, and shut off the engine. For a moment, everything was silent, the kind of heavy quiet that only winter nights carry. Then the horse moved again, but not freely. He was tied to a tree. Daniel's breath hitched. The Mustang's dark brown coat was coated in ice and dirt, his thick black mane stiff from the freezing temperatures. His legs trembled violently, barely able to hold himself up. But worst of all, his body was covered in cuts, deep fresh, some still bleeding against the cold air. Daniel felt a sickening wave of anger rise in his chest. Who could do this? The Mustang lifted his head weakly, his dark eyes filled with exhaustion and pain. He didn't fight, didn't try to run. He had no strength left. Daniel threw open the truck door and rushed toward the tree. He didn't know who had left this horse here, he didn't know why, but one thing was clear: if he didn't act fast, the Mustang wouldn't make it through the night. Daniel rushed forward, his boots sinking into the snow as he approached the Mustang. The closer he got, the worse it looked. The Mustang's deep brown coat was covered in patches of frozen mud, and his ribs were faintly visible beneath his thinning winter fur. His nostrils flared, releasing small clouds of breath into the frigid air, but it was clear he was barely holding on. Daniel's stomach twisted in anger. Someone had done this. Someone had tied him here and left him to die. He reached for the thick rope that cut into the Mustang's neck, tied so tightly to the tree that it had already rubbed the skin raw. "Easy, boy," Daniel murmured, his voice calm despite the rage simmering inside him. The Mustang flinched slightly, his body tensing, but he didn't fight. He was too weak. That worried Daniel even more. A horse like this, a wild Mustang, should have been fighting him, should have been trying to break free. But this one, he had already accepted his fate. Daniel worked quickly, his fingers numbing as he pulled at the frozen rope. The knots had been tied with cruel precision, as if whoever had done this wanted to ensure the Mustang couldn't escape. As he struggled to loosen the rope, his mind raced. Who would do something like this? And why? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the rope gave way. The Mustang stumbled forward, his legs buckling beneath him. Daniel caught him, his own body straining under the weight of the animal. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice steady. "You're safe now." But as he looked into the Mustang's eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger, darker story. What had happened to this horse? And who was responsible for leaving him here to die? Little did Daniel know, the answers to those questions would lead him down a path he never could have imagined. A path filled with cruelty, survival, and an unbelievable twist that would leave everyone speechless. The rope was tied tight, deliberately cruel, but with enough force, it finally loosened. As soon as the rope slipped free, the Mustang staggered. Daniel lunged forward, grabbing the side of the horse's neck to steady him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Daniel could feel the rapid, unsteady beat of the Mustang's heart, the way his legs trembled under his own weight. If he didn't get him warm soon, shock would set in. He had to get him out of here, now. Daniel glanced back at his pickup truck. The snow along the roadside was deep, and he hadn't brought a trailer. He couldn't load a full-grown Mustang into the back of a truck bed. That meant only one thing: he had to get him to walk. The Mustang stood motionless, his head low, his legs stiff from the cold. Daniel reached into his coat pocket, pulling out the only thing he had on him, a granola bar. It wasn't much, but it was something. He carefully unwrapped it and broke off a small piece, extending his palm. The Mustang sniffed the air, his nostrils twitching. Daniel barely breathed as the Mustang took a hesitant step forward, then another. Slowly, the Mustang reached out, his muzzle barely brushing against Daniel's fingers before snatching the food away. Daniel exhaled in relief. Good. He still had enough fight left to eat. That meant he could still walk. "Come on, boy," Daniel urged, stepping back slowly, giving the Mustang room. The stallion blinked sluggishly, his legs unsteady, but he followed, one step, then another. It was slow, painfully slow. Daniel kept talking, his voice steady, encouraging. With every few steps, the Mustang would falter, his legs almost giving out beneath him, but every time, he caught himself and kept moving. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The truck was only 100 yards away, but in the freezing cold with a half-frozen, injured Mustang, every step felt like a battle. Daniel clenched his jaw. The Mustang couldn't collapse here. If he went down now, he wouldn't get back up. So Daniel did something crazy. He took off his jacket, his thick, insulated coat, and draped it over the Mustang's shoulders. The stallion flinched at the sudden warmth, his body instinctively reacting. Daniel patted his neck, stepping forward again. "Let's go, boy. Almost there." And somehow, against all odds, the Mustang took another step. Then another. And as Daniel led him toward the truck, he knew this wasn't just about saving a horse. This was about saving a soul that had already been abandoned once. And Daniel wasn't about to let him down. The freezing air bit at Daniel's skin, his body already shivering from the loss of his heavy coat. But he didn't care. The Mustang needed it more than he did. They were still a few steps away from the truck, but every inch felt like a battle. The stallion's legs trembled beneath him, his hooves sinking slightly into the snow. His breathing was labored, coming in short, uneven bursts. And every few strides he faltered, his body threatening to collapse. Daniel clenched his fists. He couldn't let that happen. He kept his pace slow, moving alongside the Mustang, his hands hovering near the horse's shoulder in case he needed support. Each step was a fight, but the horse kept moving, one more and then another, until finally they reached the truck. Daniel's breath fogged in the freezing air as he studied the problem in front of him. The Mustang was here, but how was he going to get him inside? The truck didn't have a trailer, just the open bed in the back. Even if the horse had enough strength to climb in, it was too dangerous. One slip could send him tumbling onto the frozen ground. He needed something else. His gaze darted around the area, searching for a solution. Then he saw it, a small, abandoned barn just barely visible through the trees. His heart leaped. It wasn't much, just a rickety old shelter, half covered in snow, but it had 4 walls and a roof. A place to get the Mustang warm before it was too late. He turned to the Mustang, his fingers tightening in the fabric of his coat still draped over the horse's back. "Come on, boy," he murmured. The Mustang blinked slowly, his ears twitching, but he didn't resist as Daniel led him toward the barn. Daniel pushed the doors open, the old wood creaking loudly in protest. Inside, the air was only slightly warmer than outside, but it was better than nothing. An old pile of hay lay against the far wall, and Daniel immediately led the Mustang toward it, letting him sink down into the warmth. The stallion collapsed into the hay, his legs folding beneath him as he let out a long, exhausted sigh. For a moment, neither of them moved. Daniel just stood there, his breath heavy, his heart pounding, watching as the horse laid still, his body shivering but safe, for the first time since finding him. He wasn't dying. But this wasn't over yet. Daniel grabbed his phone, his fingers stiff and numb from the cold. He had 1 bar of signal, just enough. Quickly, he dialed the only person he knew would come without question. "Charlie, it's me," Daniel said as soon as the call connected. A groggy voice answered. "Dan? Do you know what time it is?" Daniel glanced at his watch. 2:47 a.m. It didn't matter. "I need your trailer." "Now," Daniel said, his tone urgent. "I found a Mustang. He's freezing, injured, and if we don't move fast, he won't make it." Silence. Then the sound of rustling blankets. "I'm on my way." Daniel turned back to the Mustang. He had done everything he could for now. The only thing left to do was wait. He pulled a few armfuls of hay around the Mustang, trying to insulate as much warmth as possible. The stallion stayed still, his eyes half-lidded, his body still trembling from the cold. Daniel crouched beside him, watching. Minutes passed. Then slowly, the Mustang lifted his head, his dark eyes locking onto Daniel's. There was something in that gaze, something that made Daniel's chest tighten. This wasn't just a horse. This was a fighter. And Daniel was going to make sure he lived to fight another day. Something passed between them in that moment, a silent understanding. "You saved me." Daniel swallowed hard, and then in a move that shocked him, the Mustang leaned forward, resting his muzzle against Daniel's knee. It was weak, barely a touch, but it was a thank you. Daniel let out a shaky breath. "You're going to make it, boy," he whispered. And this time, he believed it. The old barn creaked in the wind, its worn wooden beams groaning under the weight of time. The only sound inside was the slow, labored breathing of the Mustang, his body still trembling from the cold. Daniel sat nearby, watching him carefully. The horse's dark eyes fluttered open and closed, exhaustion pulling him under, but he was still fighting. That was all that mattered. Outside, the sound of approaching tires crunching against the frozen ground broke the silence. Daniel's heart leaped. Charlie was here. Daniel rose to his feet, quickly stepping outside just as the truck and trailer came to a stop. The driver's door swung open, and Charlie Dawson, a grizzled rancher in his early 50s, stepped out. His face was lined from years of hard work, his gray-streaked beard dusted with frost, and his sharp blue eyes scanned the scene immediately. The moment he saw Daniel's coat draped over the Mustang inside the barn, his expression darkened. "What the hell happened?" Charlie asked, pulling his own coat tighter around him. Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his frozen hair. "Someone tied him up and left him for dead." Charlie cursed under his breath, shaking his head. "Cowards." Then he stepped forward, his eyes softening as he got a closer look at the Mustang. The stallion was watching them, still too weak to rise, but his breathing had evened slightly. The warmth of the barn and hay had helped stabilize him, but he wasn't out of danger yet. Charlie let out a long sigh. "You sure he's strong enough to move?" Daniel clenched his jaw. "He has to be." They couldn't wait until morning. The stallion was still frozen, weak, and likely dehydrated. If they left him here overnight, the cold could finish what his captor started. But moving him was a huge risk. If he collapsed in the trailer, he might not get back up. Charlie scratched his beard. "All right. Let's do this slow." Daniel turned back to the Mustang, crouching beside him. "Listen, buddy," he murmured. "I know you're tired. I know this is hard. But you have to get up." The Mustang blinked slowly, his ears twitching. Daniel rose, stepping back to give him space. The moment of truth. The stallion shifted his weight, his legs trembling as he tried to lift himself. His hooves slipped slightly, his muscles barely responding. For a split second, Daniel's heart sank. Then, the Mustang gritted through the pain. With a shaky, determined effort, he lifted himself onto all fours. Charlie let out a low whistle. "Damn. That's one tough horse." Daniel felt a surge of pride in his chest. "Yeah, he is." Charlie backed the trailer close to the barn entrance, lowering the ramp gently onto the snow-covered ground. The Mustang watched cautiously, his ears flicking at the unfamiliar sound. Daniel took a step closer, keeping his voice low and steady. "You're safe now," he said softly. "One last step, and we're out of here." The stallion huffed, shifting his weight. He wasn't running anymore, but he was still uncertain. Charlie grabbed a small bucket from his truck and poured some water into it. The Mustang sniffed the air, his instincts recognizing what he needed most. Slowly, he took his first step onto the ramp, then another, until he was inside. Daniel released the breath he didn't even realize he was holding. The Mustang was finally safe. For the first time since finding him, relief settled in Daniel's chest. But the real question still remained: who had done this? And why? The Mustang stood inside the trailer, his legs still shaky but holding firm. His breath fogged up the cold air, but he was safe now, at least for the moment. Daniel and Charlie secured the trailer doors before climbing into the truck. The engine rumbled to life, and they pulled away from the abandoned barn, leaving behind the brutal scene where they had found the Mustang. But Daniel couldn't shake the unease in his chest. Someone had done this. Someone had tied that horse to a tree, beaten him, and left him to die in the cold. And Daniel needed to find out who, and why. "Head. I figured as much. But you know Jeb Calloway's not the kind to go down easy. He's got connections, and he's slippery as hell. You're gonna need more than a leather strap with his initials to take him down." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He kept his focus on the Mustang, gently wiping away the dirt and dried blood from the horse's wounds. The stallion's breathing had steadied, and his trembling had lessened, but the scars, both physical and emotional, were still fresh. Daniel's voice was low, almost a growl, when he finally spoke. "I don't care how slippery he is. He left this horse to die. He's not getting away with it." Charlie studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But you're gonna need proof. Solid proof. And you're gonna need to be smart about it. Jeb's not just gonna roll over because you're mad." Daniel stood, tossing the cloth back into the bucket. "I know. But I'm not letting this go. Not this time." He glanced at the Mustang, who was now lying down in the straw, his eyes half closed. The horse looked peaceful for the first time since Daniel had found him. "He deserves justice. And I'm going to make sure he gets it." Charlie pushed off the stall door, clapping Daniel on the shoulder. "You've got my help, you know that. But we've got to play this smart. Jeb's not just some two-bit crook. He's dangerous." Daniel nodded, his jaw set.
I know.
But so am I. The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what lay ahead settling over them. The Mustang let out a soft snort, his ears twitching as he drifted into a restless sleep. Daniel watched him, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about one horse. It was about every animal Jeb Calloway had ever hurt, every life he'd ruined. And Daniel wasn't going to stop until he made sure Jeb paid for what he'd done. As the first light of dawn broke through the barn windows, Daniel turned to Charlie. "Let's get to work. We've got a lot to do." Charlie nodded, a grim smile on his face.
Yeah.
"Let's take him down." Over the next few weeks, the Mustang grew stronger. His wounds healed under Daniel's care, and his coat, once dull and caked in dirt, now gleamed under the sunlight. His legs, once shaky and weak, carried him with power and confidence. But there was still one thing missing: a name. Daniel stood outside the pasture, watching as the Mustang galloped freely across the open land, his tail flicking high, his spirit unbroken. Charlie walked up beside him, sipping his coffee. "Decided on a name yet?" Daniel exhaled, a small smile tugging at his lips.
Phoenix.
Charlie raised an eyebrow.
Phoenix.
Daniel nodded, his eyes never leaving the horse. "Because he rose from the ashes." Charlie chuckled, nodding in approval.
Fitting.
As they watched Phoenix kick up his heels, his freedom finally restored, Daniel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This Mustang wasn't just a survivor, he was a fighter. And now, he was finally home. If this story touched your heart, remember, animals deserve kindness and protection. Let's stand against cruelty and fight for those who can't fight for themselves. Subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Together, we can make a difference, one rescue at a time.